everybody. I'm Mike Bizarre. Alan Schimmel is out at Black Hat today, so he won't be on the show with me, but we have an awesome lineup of guests, and we're going to be talking about DevOps and AI. Then we're going to be talking about a little reverse engineering of code using AI. And finally, we're going to have a deep discussion about what it means for Google to be a convicted monopolist. Hey, you're watching Techstrong Gang, and we'll be back in a minute. All right, folks, we're back, and let me introduce our guests for today because we have some new ones. But let's start with Mitch, who is not in Denver today. Mitch, where are you?
I am actually in Las Vegas at Black Hat.
There you go, which I'm not sure everybody knows what Black Hat is, but it's one of the big security conferences that take place during the course of the year. And, of course, we have Amanda Rosani, who's home in Texas, I believe.
Yes, that is correct.
And then finally, our newest guest, Dave Nicholson, is out in California. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
All right. Dave is with Futurum. And do you have a particular specialty at Futurum since this is your first time at joining us in the gang?
I think sort of the specialty that I bring is voice of the tech customer because I'm adjunct faculty in the Wharton CTO Academy. So if I had to be nailed down to something, to a single hat, that would be it. Dave's the guy who talks to CIOs and CTOs every day. That would be me.
All right.
That's an impressive program that you're part of too, David. It's pretty amazing what they do at Wharton with you.
All right. Awesome. So it is fair to say that you are a geek's geek.
Try to be.
All right. Well, let's jump into our first topic because we got a lot of geeky stuff going on today. Our first article that we want to talk about is a new report from Techstrong Research authored by Mitch Ashley. And it goes into, well, what is the level of adoption of AI among DevOps folks and what are we seeing? And I know, Mitch, you authored this report and did all the research. So why don't you kind of walk us through the highlights a little bit?
Well, a bit of a labor of love because this is actually an update to a report we did in 2022. Techstrong Research did a report about what are the anticipated benefits of AI. That was pre-Gen AI, and then copilots and things were starting to be used, and AI being introduced in some of the DevOps and testing and other kinds of tools. So this gave us a chance to come back and say, okay, now a lot of things have happened, right? The news cycle is about 2 hours these days. So, and it seems like the AI is on a shorter cycle. So it was really interesting. We talked to a variety of people, folks primarily involved in developing software, ranging from architects to engineering leadership to developers and testers, system reliability engineers, platform engineers, et cetera, and trying to understand. So, what's happening? Are people seeing any benefit from AI yet and using it anywhere in the SDLC? And there were some really surprising in a way findings. In terms of people that are using it, about 24% said that about 20% said that they're using artificial intelligence in some phases, any one or more of the phases of the software development life cycle. So they're consciously knowing that we're using AI part of our development, part of our testing, part of whatever phase that might be. And at least 24% had at least one phase that they were using in it. But the two standouts, probably not too surprising, were that we're using AI today in writing code and also preventing defects and doing testing. Those are the three standouts, but not that far behind were other areas of the software development lifecycle. I think there were some real eye-openers there. The people who are what we call the more mature phases of DevOps, because we did ask, how long you've been doing DevOps? How would you assess your maturity of DevOps? And how do you see you're performing? Are you assessing your abilities as a DevOps-oriented organization? And those who are using AI and are in the more mature stages of DevOps, we call it adoption. We call it the unicorns, kind of at the very top end. And also people who are standardizing, meaning they've gone through the adoption, they've learned, they're really standardizing DevOps or have standardized it across their organization, rated themselves higher in their performance or either in the high or medium two categories as compared to the group who are not using DevOps. So actually not using AI as part of their DevOps. So it's a great report. By the way, it's a very approachable report too. A lot of graphics and content. You certainly can read it, but you can also skim through it, and there's a highlight section of some of the findings. So that's just a quick recap. But again, labor of love. These things take a little while to get done, and it was a real pleasure publishing it. And Tricentis was the sponsor. They had some input on the questions and give some feedback on the write up. But the research is ours, so we're happy to be publishing it.
Let me ask you this about it, because what struck me was it seemed like, well, maybe not everybody's using AI just yet, but those that are seem to be rapidly moving it through the entire software development lifecycle. And so once you get into AI, it seems like you kind of want to use it everywhere.
Very, very true. There are some easy entry points. The co-pilots in development is one obvious place because it's already built into many IDEs, and a lot of organizations they're not using it, they're experimenting with it. Like, how much do we use it for code completion, or do we actually generate some code with it as well? So that seems to be the most common entry point. And then, of course, any tools that you're using, like if you're using a testing tool that has AI built into it, if you're using a CI/CD platform, GitHub, for example, repository, whatever you're using, those are also kind of ways that it's introduced into the SDLC. One of the other interesting findings is, I think you kind of know the answer to this, but are we just turning AI loose? Do we just let it do what it's going to do, or do people have to still be in the loop? And very heavily, folks saw that being a human in the loop, looking at the output of AI in any in those places in the SDLC was very important. Just a small fraction said, "Yeah, we kind of let it do what it's doing." I imagine that's not too big a shot doing that from that standpoint. We also looked at productivity. What is the impact on the people, processes, and productivity of people, and how much is it impacting your productivity? How does it help you keep up with the demands? And across the board of the kind of positive ratings, the kind of somewhat more productive, somewhat usually hitting demands, things like that, were pretty substantial. But even those in the significantly in those two categories were also fairly high. There's a middle of the road. We're not seeing an impact yet, but there was very little who were saying it's negative on productivity. And we've heard some things about AI taking more time, particularly if you're using Gen AI for writing or things like that. So it doesn't seem like it's getting in the way or taking people too far off course to introduce it into their development.
David, I think it's fair to say that we are in the hype cycle of AI, especially for software development. What's your assessment of what's really going on here? I mean, last year there was probably a lot of what you might call irrational exuberance. So where are we on this actual journey?
I think we're in the if you go sort of down to the lowest levels of the IT stack, I think some rationality has returned. Folks who are making decisions about building these stacks realize that there isn't only a single blessed way to accomplish what they want to accomplish in the world of AI. So I think that there will be a lot of realignment of players in this space. NVIDIA, of course, is going to dominate, again, diving down to the lower part of the stack. So I think we're in sort of the place where we start to get more rational about these conversations. But on AI for DevOps in particular, it's important always when we use either if the TLA is a 2-letter acronym or a 3-letter acronym, that we sort of define what we're talking about. Because yes, AI, artificial intelligence. Well, that's a big umbrella. People immediately leap to this concept of generative AI, autoregressive generative AI, because we're so familiar with it at the consumer level. So people hear AI and DevOps, and the conclusion they generally leap to is, oh, you've got this engine that's going to generate code by the use of plain language. Computer. I shouldn't say that because my device will go off here. Sorry. I have my Alexa programmed for that. Had done plug. Little Star Trek reference there. So, you say computer. write me a software program with a caterpillar that catches butterflies. And the system, oh, okay. It goes out and it generates the code. That's not really where we are now. To Mitch's point, if you go back in history, we called it pair programming. Now you have an artificial co-pilot with you at your shoulder, sort of making suggestions, but the person is very much in charge of the tool. But the vast majority of AI that's happening in DevOps today and everywhere, frankly, is what we would call sophisticated machine learning and automation. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's awesome. It's where it's going to begin. I guess my final thought on AI is, much like cloud, I think at some point in the not too distant future, we're just not going to talk about AI. It's all going to be considered IT. Just like cloud is IT. It's all IT. It's information technology. Yes, what we're doing in AI is revolutionary to a degree, but really it's just the next thing in information technology development.
Yeah, it's interesting you place it that way, because one of the things we discussed is, what do we title this report? Is it AI and DevOps? Is it software generated code with AI? And we stayed with the AI augmented DevOps, because it's not AI in the driver's seat. It's the co-pilot, or it's behind the scenes.
Yes.
It's, like your pair programming example, I'm going to look at the code, because we don't have code generators that we know generate better quality code or more secure code, things like that, more reliable code. So there's, we're relying on some general LLMs to aid us, at least in terms of generative AI and the code writing. There's a long ways to go. And that's part of the theme of the report is, here's the impact we're seeing so far, but we're at the beginning of all this. This is
augmentation. I love augmented, because at some point it almost becomes absurd for us as humans to say that, well, it's me augmented. It's like, no, dude, you were driving a freight train. The freight train was towing everything along the tracks. It's like, no. It was just augmenting my strength. It's like,
well, I should say no AI was harmed in the making of this report, just so we're all clear.
So I had a question in regard to the report, and Mike and I were talking about this yesterday in our podcast. It was another report that we were reviewing, but it was saying while AI was increasing efficiency, in fact, what it was doing was causing more burnout in a lot of employees, because they had more of a workload because of the efficiency. They had so much more of a workload, their brain capacity couldn't really handle it. So they were struggling from burnout. So what are your thoughts on this?
It's a great question. It's not something we looked directly at, Amanda. And I'm familiar with that report too, of, just trying to figure out how to use AI, create more workload on top of trying to get what we're done in the first place. So are you having a net productivity gain? When we saw what the changes in people's work, productivity was the first thing that they kind of pointed out, and real closely for developers as well as for test teams. So which tends to be, that's I don't want to say they're the bottlenecks, but that's kind of two of the things that are essential to get code, get software developed and get it out the door. There's a lot of other elements as well. And they did say fewer resources, full-time people, things like that. But we started kind of falling off on what are the changes to people's jobs. So I think there's a lot of shakeout to do yet. And I've never been a believer of, the cloud is going to replace everybody's job. No, it replaced people that hung machines on racks. It didn't replace people doing work. Same thing for AI. I think it's largely augmenting what we do. I'd love to have LLMs. We're not here. LLMs that help us reduce technical debt. If we had an LLM to do that, turn that loose on all those things that the developers don't want to go back, or helping us figure out what those systems do, that the people that wrote them are long gone and we're afraid to touch those parts of the applications. I think there's some real productivity gains there. So bottom line, we didn't look at that specifically, but I didn't see anything in the data that I got that sense that people are, if anything, they're maybe trying to figure out where the best cases in their applications are to use AI. That's where there's new work. I would look
at this productivity question. I would ask Amanda, you see this, you're familiar with the mobile device, obviously. Does this give you more freedom, or is it a ball and chain? Right? It's like, I I can work from anywhere. I have to work from everywhere. I think those AI tools are going, there's going to be a mixed bag as we go forward with that. An individual developer inevitably will be able to be more productive if they let that bury them, like some people let their mobile devices bury them. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
Of course, your mileage may vary if you're asking my family versus me, right?
David, you're absolutely right. Good point there.
David, let me just ask you one last question here. It seems like one of the things that's in this survey that leapt out at me was only 9% or so of the folks are, totally trusting the output of these Gen AI platforms. So have we reached a point where, it's great. I got a little tool. It's going to help me do something a little bit faster, but the reality of it is it's not this end-to-end magical button. It is a thing that helps us get something started, but it won't complete nearly any task. Or if we let it complete any task, we should look at it really hard.
Yeah. Let's say you're using a tool like this. How many times does it have to be wrong for you to say, this is a waste of my time? Now I'm proofreading the work of a kindergartner. This doesn't make sense. Eventually, people will start to trust it. There's a parallel with driving aids, self-driving systems in vehicles. It's the same sort of thing. It's one thing, hey, straight highway, I have a 3-hour monotonous drive. You very quickly will trust the system. Try driving that same car with the same system in stop-and-go traffic in a construction zone on a rainy day. It doesn't take too many, whoa, what were you doing, for you to say, forget about this and turn the system off. So I think there are going to be fits and starts as we go, but it's going to be an upward slant to adoption. There will be people who will try it, say, forget this, I'll come back later. There will be people who stick with it because they're early adopters, but over time, more and more people will learn to trust it as it gets better and better.
Hey, David, a question for you. This is a big question, but are there any highlights you can share of what are the conversations about AI in the program at Wharton that you're part of? What are the things that are bubbling up to the surface?
Well, it's sort of funny. I'd say going back 6-12 months ago, a lot of the conversation was, and I'm being silly, but I'm serious. This is the way that the conversation goes. The CIO says, I'm really, really upset that we fired all of our people who could be doing work on this stuff on premises in favor of moving everything we do to the cloud, because now we have no data center muscle. We have no one who can come in and create something that will be a unique value proposition in the world of AI. We're a slave to the cloud providers. We can't even buy NVIDIA GPUs if we can get our hands on them. And the thing that makes me the most mad is that I'm the one who fired all those people. That's their thing. They're realizing, oh, wow, if I had known what I know now, maybe I would have held into reserve some of this smarts internally. So that's one dynamic. But then the other is the what I alluded to earlier, this idea that people are realizing, wait a minute, maybe you don't need the Ferrari highest end NVIDIA GPU based infrastructure, completely integrated stack. Maybe I don't need that for everything. Maybe I don't need it for anything. People are just learning the difference between inference and training. We focus a lot on training. People don't realize that in aggregate, there's going to be way more inference than there will be training. It's just training is concentrated into these mega clusters. So I think that's a good sampling. There's a lot of other stuff. Oh, and the final thought I would say is, because I work with folks on their papers that they're writing over the course of the year on what they're doing with AI, and I would say 80% of it, we would all look at it and we would say, yeah, that's AI. It's ML. It has nothing to do. It's machine learning. Which is great. It has nothing to do with generative AI, not yet in some of these cases. And that's perfectly fine. Not everything has to be the sexy, shiny, new object for it to be valuable.
All right, folks, we can talk about this probably for the entire show, but we
please, yes, continue, Mike. Thank you.
we have to move on to our other segments. I would just conclude with, remember that thing about trust, right? It's hard to win and easily lost. We'll be back in a minute. All right, we're back, and Mitch kind of brought this up in the first segment when he was talking about technical debt, and there's now a whole movement afoot to kind of reverse engineer a lot of the existing code that's out there. DARPA has a project where they want to turn C and C++ code into Rust, which is said to be a more secure language because it doesn't leave so much stuff visible in memory. And then we also have an article on Techstrong AI talking about the rise of software intelligence, which is kind of like business intelligence for software, where we're going to do a lot more analytics and understanding how the software is constructed so that we can change it or reverse engineer it when the time comes. I'm going to start with Mitch. We've been hearing a lot about this stuff, about you rewriting entire applications into different languages. Folks are doing COBOL to Java. Other folks are trying to convert things into Go or whatever it might be. From your perspective, is this going to be like a major trend? Is this the new face of application modernization?
Well, I think it's a thread through that process. Very few organizations are going to go say, let's go back and rewrite everything in blah to Rust, for example. But they may say, going forward, here's what we want to start using. I'll use AWS as an example. They made a conscious decision a few years back about what they want to develop their software in, and they chose Rust. I love Rush, different band, different topic. But for a couple of reasons, C and C++.
Geddy Lee is a programmer, right?
Love Geddy Lee. Absolutely. Love all three of them. Yeah, and you remember the days we used to talk about C++ and C of, there's memory leaks, right? There's things happening, processes would run amok and take over and have to get killed and restarted and things like that. There's a lot of housekeeping that you have to do in those traditional languages, object-oriented or not. And then we kind of shift to the other end of the spectrum where we used to use Perl heavily. Now we use a lot of Python. And any number of programming languages which take a lot of that housekeeping away from you, and it's easier to develop in. It's much more approachable. But they don't have things that Rust has. Rust has what they call type safety, meaning this variable is an integer and it will always be an integer and it can never become something else so that it doesn't get exploited and get SQL injected into it. Just a really simple example. It also has memory protections, and that's one of the biggest features because once we're running code, it's not, sitting on the disk, it's running in the memory of a computer, and it's both susceptible to being attacked, but also to getting into other parts of the system, into the operating system or other parts of the application. And one of the big pushes around AI is how do I protect my data that AI is using, whether it's generative AI, machine learning, et cetera, all the way down to the chip level. So I don't want code that's running in a processing unit, where it's a GPU or IPU or CPU, that's also co-processing AI type data to share that memory together. So there's a lot of focus on all the way down to the hardware level, which has a lot of implications for the programming languages that you use. So long explanation, but I went into that because it is important. We could reach a day where what are you doing to, programs that you're writing to add memory protections, to add type safety and things like that? I don't think we're there yet, maybe except for defense and government kind of contracts, but I think we're headed down that path.
David, are CIOs talking about technical debt and these issues, or are they just kind of pretending they don't exist?
Well, which ones? The ones who are just about to get fired, they ignore it. They ignore it. They figure CIO stands for careers over, and it just doesn't matter. No, part of what we talk about as the CTO mindset, which has to be incorporated into every CIO's role, is this idea of ambidextrous management. You have finite resources, you have infinite demands put upon you, and what do you have to do? You have to do two things at once. You have to keep the lights on, manage technical debt, and you have to innovate. You have to run the business, you have to change the business. You have to do these things at the same time. So technical debt is always a nightmare, and it's often either because of budgetary concerns or because of technical reasons. It's the friction that prevents a lot of innovation from happening. But I think that I think Mitch, Freudian slip here, because I think of DARPA as sort of being akin to the priests at the Temple of Syrinx. I don't know how big of a Rush fan you are, but that's a Rush reference.
Oh, yes.
From 2112. The point is, I want transparency and visibility into the transmogrification of code. If what we're saying is, hey, we're going to create this centralized government agency, we're going to go back and we're going to rewrite all of this code for your safety. I want visibility into that system. Not that I don't trust. Trust was alluded to earlier, but I don't trust.
That's the Tom Sawyer of the picture who's talking other people into, let's go rewrite everything.
Right. So I get it. It makes sense. I would like to see a focus on control system software, frankly. And I plead ignorance. I don't know. I don't know the frameworks that are generally used there, but the kinds of things that control valves and switches in electrical grids and water systems, those need to be hardened. I think that would be a great place to go if the constitutional things we ask our government to do are provide for the common defense and support the general welfare. I say let's harden our infrastructure first before we go out and transmogrify code. A little bit of a tangent there, but
so a lot of people watching this. Sorry, a lot of people watching this show are now running prog rock lyrics through ChatGPT to understand what you guys are referring to.
I'm renaming all my variables to brush lyrics. So just a little perspective on technical debt. There are different estimates of this, but you can find how many lines of code are in existence that are still running today, and the numbers are like 5 trillion, and literally that's some of the estimates. So it's really crazy. Every line of code written that you aren't working on is technical debt. So that's how big technical debt is. I mean, you may have not have touched it for 5 years, you may have touched it for a month, but every one of those lines of code you have to maintain is technical debt. So we are building this problem, higher. The mountain's getting taller and taller, right? It's not shrinking.
Well, about technical debt, I posted an article a few days ago, George Holm wrote, and it was an interesting use case about a company that just decided to get rid of all the technical debt, just wipe it all clean, start fresh, put in all new and completely digitally transform. And it worked well for them. It was a great return on investment. So I would love to hear your thoughts on, should business leaders be trying to just get rid of all that and start fresh? In the end, is it a better return on investment?
I'm curious, Amanda, kind of when I've run IT and development organizations, you build up all of these things that we should do. And at one point it was a good idea. And oftentimes it's just like, that's actually, even if we did that, it wouldn't be helpful. So you kind of cull out, 2/3 of the debt that you think you have to do. Did they go through a process like that to really figure out what's meaningful to fix and let's just shed the rest?
Yes. Yeah. It was, it was a whole planning process. And in the end, it worked well for them. I don't know if it would work for all companies to just wipe all their technical debt out and start fresh.
David, IT budgets, in my experience, are kind of like bills running through Congress, and like everybody attaches all kinds of stuff to them. And so how many CIOs do you think are going to say, we're launching an AI initiative and we need this amount of money to go do that? And then they're going to pull in all this technical debt cleanup effort underneath that because, well, who's going to check a line item?
Well, I don't know if this tracks with what you're saying, but I'm constantly admonishing folks that I work with that it's very easy to adopt the saying that, well, we're considering AI for everything. Our AI strategy is important. It's sort of like a few years ago when people would proudly say, we have a cloud first policy here, which to me sounds like, I'm a mechanic, I have a screwdriver first policy. It's like, oh, really? So if you see a bolt on the end of a screw, first on a nut on a screw, I'm going to try a screwdriver first. Why wouldn't you use a wrench? You look at it, that's a wrench job, not a no. We always use try cloud first. Come on, fit for function. So in this case, I don't know. I think that people, what I admonish people to do is pay attention to the things that they think are not important. The CIO doesn't have to care about the storage systems, but in the environment, as an example, refreshing them. But someone in the CIO's organization needs to, because if you optimize infrastructure, if you take your eye off the infrastructure ball, you're not going to have budget for AI. So by focusing on the things that aren't cool, you free up budget in this finite resources, infinite demands world that they live in. So long way to get to the point. Focus on the boring stuff to free up capital for the cool stuff. And just really quickly, because Mitch tossed out 5 trillion, numbers like that are impossible to conceive, right? But I have an example to help the audience. So this is 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. So hopefully that helps.
Wow.
To get your arms around what the numbers are.
You're a rich man. I don't know what it's worth.
I think this is worth $1.
I think part of the issue here with technical debt, though, is I think more people will rewrite code for the following reason: is the people who wrote that COBOL program from 30 years ago are sitting on a beach somewhere, and they're not going to help me come fix it, or if they do, they're going to charge me a fortune. So, how many C-level folks are thinking through the fact that there's just a lot of stuff that they're trying to run from bygone days that there's nobody around who remembers how it works?
I'll share one experience like that, Mike. I took over a SaaS product that runs about 93 million transactions a year, doing kind of service locator type functionality. It had been written in ASP.NET several years back. People who wrote it are long gone. And there were major sections of the code that we were just afraid to touch because nobody understood it, nobody what to do with it. And so when we looked at moving to the cloud and modernizing it, rewriting it was just not impractical. I tried that earlier in my career and I managed to survive those mistakes and still here. But what we did was look at, let's take the whole monolith application and say, what parts of it really does the business need to be able to add more things to it? What flexibility do we need? Where do we need more agility to be able to modify this quickly? And there was one area of the product that really most of the business needs were being asked for. There were hundreds of things across the whole app. So that's the part that we moved to microservices and use containers and Kubernetes and tried to use a more flexible approach so we could add and update it much more quickly. Saved a ton of money. It turned out to be a successful strategy in that case. But that's only because we were able to pinpoint what parts of this do we change. So unless you've got something that's so antiquated, you need to really rethink and write the app. It's hard to justify, let's put this into Rust. Let's put this into microservices. All those are tough decisions unless you're just backed into a corner. You don't have an option.
Yeah. David, who makes a fortune on technical debt? Global system integrators. They kind of launch these projects and then they show up and they move in for a couple of years and then they announce that they have either succeeded or they just throw up their hands and say sorry, but they don't give you your money back.
Always declare victory. Always declare victory.
And sell the next contract, right?
That's right. So yeah, one quick example that's we're experiencing in real time in terms of technical debt and friction associated with it. VMware. Look at the bluster. People are frustrated. Broadcom comes in, and clearly Broadcom's going to ride the long tail of VMware into the future. If people could snap their fingers and move to something else, they would, largely. In a lot of cases, people would do that, but you can't because of the friction associated with change. And so technical debt actually is opportunity for global systems integrators, companies that want to take on these very sticky portfolios of technical debt. It's a mixed bag.
I'll tell you one thing I am optimistic about all this, because to your point about that, the cost of switching IT platforms is just way too high. And if we can rely on AI tools to reduce that by making it easier to take some platform that has some dependencies that are designed to lock you in and then reverse engineer that into something that is more generic code that can run anywhere, I think the level of competition across the IT industry is about to dramatically increase. Now, David, am I engaging in some wishful thinking?
Well, you could, there's, let's see, I jumped into the multiverse just for a moment while you were proposing this. And one possible path I saw was, with all of your good intentions, where we ended up was almost a pharmaceutical industry model where developers in IT had to use patent protection so that they could get enough profit to warrant the work they did to do the development. I was part of something called the Open Data Center Alliance. I don't even know, more than a decade ago. And what the Open Data Center Alliance customers said was, I want perfect substitutions for everything that I do in IT. I want the best functionality that the market can deliver. And I want to be able to grind all of your heads together in a price war to get you down to the lowest common denominator. It's like, well, where does that leave room for innovation, really, when there's no profit motive in differentiating? So it can go sideways. But I agree. I mean, the promise of cloud was supposed to be portability. We still don't see a lot of people moving stuff back and forth. But yes, to the extent we could drive friction out of the system, everyone benefits.
So you're basically saying I will not see a generic version of my IT platform that I can go buy for a nickel.
I don't think so. Not one that you want to buy for a nickel. Not one that's worth a nickel. Yeah.
Don't throw those COBOL skills away, Mike, quite yet.
Don't throw them away. They're getting more valuable every day.
We just had a show talking about how we're training kids to write COBOL programs because that's where the money is, although all the cool kids think the other languages are cool. But hey, somebody's got to make money, and if everybody's using AI to write code, maybe you should learn COBOL because AI might not learn that as quickly. Yep. We will see how all this plays out in the future, but stay tuned as we continue to talking about our next section, which is, well, Google has joined, shall we say, an elite club, and we'll dive into what that means in a minute. We'll be right back.
Discover Techstrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with Techstrong Group.
All right, folks, as we described, Google is now a convicted monopolist. And, well, I can't make up my mind if they should be congratulated for the fact that they managed to create this situation and they have enough market share to dominate. And from a investor perspective, maybe that's very impressive. On the other side of it, it's clear that if they eventually wind up losing the 27 appeals that will probably go through before this thing gets resolved, what are the implications of all that from a business perspective? David, what are you hearing about this case? I mean, it's been around forever, and I think everybody forgot about it. And then one morning we woke up and there was a ruling.
Yeah, and it's not just this case. There have been many other cases brought in state and federal court coming after them. I don't know why the phrase "convicted monopolist" makes me laugh, but I don't know why. But it just cracks me up. So please don't say it because I won't be able to keep a straight face. But let's take a quick step back here. What are the point of these antitrust rules? The point is to protect consumers. The idea is if in a healthy economy, you shouldn't have someone with so much control that they can artificially control prices, artificially put a damper on competition. That hurts consumers. There's nothing illegal about being a monopolist. That's why it's kind of funny to say convicted monopolist. You can have a monopoly if it's a natural monopoly. If it's like, look, and this is what Google argues. They say, look, our search engine is better. That's all. That's why people use it. The pushback is, well, the fact that your search engine is the best, if we stipulate that, it got you to a point where, unfortunately, with nefarious intent or not, you started to leverage that power in a way that is anti-competitive. That's what's been asserted and confirmed by the court in this case. Now, search engine is directly tied to another lawsuit or several other suits having to do with ads because they're, and those are inextricably tied together because search is how ads are presented and, and the two go hand in glove. So the real question is, how do consumers benefit if the government intervenes to say, Google, you must implement the following policies to prevent these anti-competitive behaviors from happening moving forward? So what does that look like? Well, something like 95% of mobile devices have as their default browser, or search, default search engine is going to be Google. And that doesn't happen by accident. And so behind the scenes, the question is Google exerting too much pressure? You look another layer down, and guess who's driving a lot of this? Is it me and you as a consumer? Are we really that upset about it? Or is it the competitors of Google? Is it the Microsofts of the world that are pushing back? And generally, that's part of the dynamic. And then my final cynical Dave view on this is that Google just hasn't been effective enough at lobbying. They're not greasing the right palms in the way that they need to. Essentially, this is a bit of a shakedown exercise. And I'm sure you're going to see Google participate even more in political elections, local, state, and federal moving forward. But does breaking up Google help us like the consent decree that broke up AT&T for myself? Probably the only one old enough to remember it on this call. The Baby Bell operating systems came out of that. It was chaotic at first, but I think in the end, more choice for consumers came out of breaking up the phone company. And but I just don't know what that would look. I'd love to hear Amanda and Mitch what you think about what would it look like. What would the world look like if the government came in and said, "We're breaking up Google"? I mean, what does that mean?
Yeah, I posted about this news when it came out. Yesterday was a huge news day in the world, I tell you. But when that news came out, I was shocked because I was thinking, what does this do to the stock market? First of all, it's already starting off badly. And then if big tech, all the other big tech lawsuits that are yet to come, what is that going to do? But anyway, when I posted that, the responses I got were that they were shocked. That was crazy. Google was the best search engine there was. I agree. I use Google the most as a search engine. So if it gets taken away on people's phones or devices, I don't think it's the consumers that were complaining. We like Google, other than some people don't like the censorship on it so much, but it is the best search engine. And so anyway, that's what I'm hearing. I don't know what y'all heard, but I definitely don't think it was a consumer complaint about Google, other than, like I said, some of the censorship.
You know what I was surprised by, and Mitch, I will get your opinion on this because, I'm going way old school here, but you remember payola? Mm-hmm. So let me get this straight. Google is paying Apple a significant amount of sum for the privilege of being the default search engine on their platforms, and they're paying other folks similarly. wasn't that part of the thing? So, is it Google who's really being at fault here, or is it Apple for taking the money from Google and, because that's part of the payola?
It is every business's objective to monetize what they create, what their advantages are in market. The question is, do you take it too far? And to David's point, where you exhibit anti-competitive behaviors. So are you doing price fixing or collusion with others in the market? Are you controlling something so much about your product that limits what others can do it? So you become so popular as search engine. Now you not only cut others out of search, but you cut others out of other parts of their business. And if that's substantial enough, the real thing that comes out of this, we're not in the days of the baby bells, which I went through that too, David. Very interesting time. Standard Oil, right? Breaking up Standard Oil. That's one of the, landmark monopoly cases. It isn't being declared a convicted monopolist, which I got that title from playing Monopoly, but not from running one. It's what the consequences are. And we live in an age where the real negotiation is, yes, we appeal it, but what are we going to have to do as a result of it? We'll change this in the algorithm. We'll change this of making it easier sort of for people to choose what search engine they use in the browser. We'll do these things about how ads are. That's where the rubber meets the road, and the outcome of this, very unlikely, they'll go to court and say, okay, we're going to break ABC up into these 5 companies and do that kind of an impact. So I think at the end of the day, and sometimes these changes that they make are so esoteric that the normal consumer don't know it. Like, for example, Microsoft had to make in part of their agreement with an EU, and one of the challenges that they faced was giving others direct access to certain things in the operating system. Well, they don't have to do that in the US, but they have to do that there. So it gets a bit esoteric, and I don't think for most of it, we're going to see, they're not going to take our browser away, to your search engine away, Amanda. Most consumers probably won't even ever see what the consequences of this are. And a lot of money will be spent by some very wealthy lawyers.
Yeah, I think Amanda brings up a good point about the political angle on this. Yes, censorship. There are a lot of people who see Google as the bottleneck for all information globally, and that control is frightening from a democracy perspective. And so I think that then percolates up, at least through the legislature. Now we're talking judiciary, we're talking about civil suits and things brought by the administrative branch of government. But yeah, don't underestimate the fact that everyone has seen the AI generated images of what appear to be African Nazis. It's like, wait, what? And so anything that smells like bias that's being injected into our lives front and center, that gets people fired up too. So that's definitely a dynamic.
Do you think people will take a minute to think about, Amanda was talking about Google as being, the best search engine experience. Well, I would argue Google maybe is the best of a bad lot. Search engine experience has just gotten worse and worse over the years. It's basically now, 5, 6 ads before you get to the actual thing you're searching for. And Google's been playing around with this algorithm for the last year where it's trying to, quote unquote, find more helpful content that's more timely. But when I go look at the search results, I don't really see that. I see the same old junk at the top of the list that's from 2 years ago. And I might be clicking through now to the 3rd window before I find what I'm looking for during a search engine. So I got to say, all this stuff about how great the Google search experience is, I'm kind of like scratching my head going, well, maybe it's time to get rid of this thing with something better. And maybe we should just go to this AI thing that knows better about what I'm looking for. Have search engines kind of outlived their usefulness? David, I'll let you jump on that grenade.
Yeah. So I think that if you ask people at Google, they would tell you that, look, all of this effort is misplaced. We at Google are terrified that we're going to lose our position of dominance. We know about this idea of disruptive technology and that something is nipping at our heels. I've always been curious, and maybe there's a way to get this answer somewhere, but what's the value of having access to free search, how much would it cost for me to have no ads, no Google intervention in terms of the ranking of items? What we're seeing is not someone coming up with a better Google version of Google, but no. Generative AI with RAG, with retrieval augmented generative AI, where I ask a question and I just get the answer. I don't get ads. I don't get things ordered based on some priority that's giving money somewhere else. But I pay $20 a month, $50 a month to have this very, very effective tool. I think that Google has, frankly, painted themselves into a corner. To your point, you've got to go down 20 hits deep to get something that isn't an ad promoted result. So I agree. I mean, we say it's the best. It is, but yeah, best what? It's like, you know what it is? It's the exit row on a Southwest Airlines flight, right? It's like, hey, I'm the president of a third world country. Great. Good for you. And so I think that the disruptive technology is going to come from the AI space. It's going to be chat-based things where not only are the search results coming in just boom, 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 but there's some logic wrapping them all together. I think that's where the disruption is going to happen. I think that disruption will happen way more quickly than any legislation can affect change.
I agree with you. I don't know if you had this experience on your phones, but I've noticed the last month or so, I use Siri a lot, and that's kind of my search engine on my phone. I'll just ask Siri, and then the AI will, scour the internet and give me back a response right away, which I have often found helpful. Now, sometimes it's not the response or I need more in-depth information, but I like that little AI response at the top when I ask. Have y'all experienced that yet?
I do use Siri for that. Not all the time.
I think Siri is sort of is sort of Alexa's sibling that just wasn't blessed with the mental acuity that Alexa was blessed with. But yeah, I do use Siri, but I'm more often frustrated by her because I use Alexa so much, and there seems to be a greater depth there. I have a feeling it's going to be hopscotch. Next gen stuff coming from Apple, I think, is going to address that. I think we're going to see logarithmic increase in its capability.
And I think they both need to go to a different school, get some more training, right? So we talk about the best. Oftentimes the best is the most familiar. That's why we're very comfortable with Google and how it works. And we already know how to do prompt engineering that we talk about in generative AI. We do prompt engineering every day when we type Google search. We have a way we know that we'll get the results, for certain things if we use it for that often enough. So to your point, Dave, if something else is truly easier and gets me the equal or better results, just easier to use, okay, now you might be talking about displacing or at least competing with it. So,
yeah, that's a brilliant insight. That what's the easiest UI? Well, it's the one you already know how to use, of course. Yeah. Right? There's no easier than that.
Command line was the best experience when that's all we had.
Right.
DOS.
All right. So I'm looking forward to reading the filing that goes something like this. Your Honor, we have messed up this product so much that the experience is so horrible that there's no way we could have a monopoly because there's all these new AI technologies that are about to replace it, because that's essentially the defense.
Their defense will be, yes, there's a ton of competition in the market. In fact, we're not even sure how we're going to pay our rent next quarter because who knows what's going to happen. But look, the numbers at this point show their dominance. But those numbers in and of themselves don't make you guilty. That's the thing. They can have 95% market share as long as they're not abusing the power that they have deservedly achieved. And that's a gray area. That's where I go down to sometimes the tipping point is how well you've lobbied Congress or not. Literally the elections in the fall could make a big difference in the way that these things sort of go in terms of scrutiny, who gets scrutinized and who doesn't. But yeah, I think in the long run, we are going to benefit from AI in this case. The challenge is in both cloud and everything associated with search and AI. These are the highest barriers to entry in the history of humanity in terms of business. This isn't, you want to compete with the chicken restaurant down the street. It's going to cost you $300,000 to get your business up and running. Ooh. No. This is like, how could you possibly say if Mitch and I decided we were going to come up with our own version of AWS? Everybody, I'd pitch in 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, and then we'd need to raise a lot. It's an insurmountable barrier to entry. Only a government, frankly, could do it. So that's kind of the difference here. When you get to the scale of something like Google, who can mount a front? Well, guess what? It's going to be the chat, the chat version. There's a recent one that there's one that's popular for search.
DuckDuckGo, which uses Bing on the back end, by the way.
Yeah, no, but specifically, it's touted as a Chat GPT like engine for search, where Chat GPT, OpenAI is saying, no, we're not trying to be Google search. That's not us. That's beneath us. But there is. I should have it on the tip of my tongue. People are starting to reference it. I'm starting to get links from this search engine, if you will, which is an AI-driven search engine.
By the way, I see your 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, and I raise you 8 quadrillion. There we go. Okay, I'm outdone. I should never. I've learned never bet against.
Amanda, you're worried about what the market does. Just give me a call. I got you covered. I just got these $9.
We're going to close this up here now on two thoughts. One is all you folks in Zimbabwe who are angry, direct your email to David. And then the second thing is, hey, just remember a couple of decades ago, we were all flipping out about the dominance of Microsoft. And now look at the world today. There's Mac OSs everywhere. Linux dominates in the server side. And we are all using Google apps in the cloud rather than Microsoft Office on your desktop. So the world is changing, and it will change, and the market will decide and vote with its feet. Folks, I want to thank you all for being on the show, and I want to thank you all for watching the show today. We'll be back with some additional content for Techstrong TV, so stay tuned.
I'm Bonnie Schneider, sustainability contributor to the Techstrong Group. I'm excited to introduce you to a groundbreaking new initiative from Techstrong Research, the Sustainability Pulse Meter. The Pulse Meter offers valuable insights into how environmental responsibility factors into tech purchasing decisions for key players in the industry. Position your company as a leader in the industry and differentiate from your competitors with the Sustainability Pulse Meter, offered exclusively from Techstrong Research.